Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by MACF and Florida Makes. I'm your host, Sherry Reeves, along with Christian Davison, and we welcome you. Today is July 21st, 2020, and we are starting at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Today's topic, Florida's Virtual International Trade Programs for Manufacturers. I would like to introduce today's speaker, Michael Cooney. Mike is the Director of International Trade and Development at Enterprise Florida, a statewide economic development organization. Mike works in the Orlando office and covers a 10-county region where he assists all companies interested in exporting their products and services globally. In addition, Mike is responsible for the aviation, aerospace, and defense sector statewide. Mike organizes, manages, and recruits companies to exhibit in the Florida Pavilion at Farnborough, Paris, Singapore, and Dubai air shows. Mike also supports Florida aviation-related companies attending MRO Europe and other MRO shows around the world. A few housekeeping notes. As a participant, your audio will be in listen-only mode, using your phone or computer, whichever is more convenient. Additionally, you will have the opportunity to ask your questions using the question window. This is a live webinar event which will be recorded. A link to the recording will be provided to you within a few days. Now, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Mike. Welcome, Mike. Mike?
This is Mike Cooney with Enterprise Florida. I lost Sherry in the introduction. Is she still there? Should I begin?
Mike, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, it blanked out. I apologize. So thank you everyone for attending. I know everyone's schedule is extremely busy, so even taking a few minutes out of your daily schedule means a great deal. And I do appreciate you attending. As was said, my name is Mike Cooney. I'm in the Orlando office of Enterprise Florida. We have a number of offices around the state, all supporting exporters as well as companies that qualify for our services and grants. I talk pretty quickly, so I will also make this presentation available at the end. I'll certainly send it over to Christian and Sherry and they can send it to you. So unless you're an overachiever, there's really no need to take notes, but that's certainly up to you. As well, at the end, we will have a Q&A, so save your questions, or I believe there's a chat box that you can also type into if you wish. With that, I will begin. Enterprise Florida is a statewide economic development organization. I'm sure many, if not all of you, have heard of Enterprise Florida. You may or may not know that we have several different divisions. The two primary divisions, at least, that are located in Orlando is the business development, as well as we have international trade. There are some people representing the Sports Foundation and a few other entities that still come under the umbrella of Enterprise Florida. With regard to the business development, that team works almost exclusively to help attract companies to Florida, whether they are outside of the state or outside of the US. So it is their job to help companies in terms of finding locations that suit their needs, and they work with all of our economic development partners around the state in order to do so. The other part of the organization, which I'm part of, is the International Trade and Development. And our job is, as you will hear in just a few moments as I go through this presentation, we help companies, primarily manufacturers, although as you'll hear, there are some other companies that will qualify for our grants and services, but primarily helping companies to export more. What we do is work mostly with small to medium-sized companies, even following the SBA guideline for companies and considered small companies is 500 employees or less. For, I would say, most of our clients, that would not be a small company. It would be actually a very large company. I believe that based on my own experience in working with companies, not only in the region, but around the state, is we're probably more in the neighborhood of anywhere from one person to as many as 50. In some cases, certainly it can go up higher than that, but that more or less is what, and the type of companies that we work with. As it also states there, we work with a number of economic development partners from around the state. They help to take the information that we have in terms of helping companies in the state and get that out to their members. Obviously, we partner closely with manufacturers associations such as MACF, and we are very pleased to have them as a partner and vice versa. We match companies seeking products and services with Florida companies. So sometimes companies will contact us and say they need certain products and services, and we will do our best to do some matchmaking in that regard. And then the promoting the out-of-state investors coming to the state. A portion of Enterprise Florida's International Trade and Development team handles foreign direct investment, and they are generally the small company that's just initially looking at Florida, maybe to set up a small regional office, 1-2 people, but then plan to grow. And at that point, in most cases, the business development team will take over and help them in their site selection process if that's what they need. I'm going to cover most of these circles during my presentation, but I'll just highlight a couple that probably won't be covered. The Export Sales and Governor's Mission, excuse me. The Export Sales and Governor-led trade missions, that's something we will get back to. It is a part of our responsibility in the organization to take cohorts or groups of Florida manufacturers to other countries. And for obvious reasons, we've had to bring those to a halt, but at some point they will start up again. And just to give you a feel for it, we've had trade missions going to Vietnam, to Ghana in West Africa, to Tanzania and Kenya, to numerous countries in Central and South America, including Colombia. So this is something that it is not always led by the governor, sometimes the lieutenant governor, sometimes our Secretary of State and the president and CEO of Enterprise Florida. So it really depends. But again, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But in case I forget, I wanted to mention we do conduct these sales missions, just not now. We also have a number of educational seminars and conferences, or if we don't have them, we help promote them through our e-newsletter. To receive our e-newsletter, you must sign up. You can either go to the Enterprise Florida website and sign up there, or you can send me an email and request to be signed up. It goes out once a month, and it pretty much covers everything that goes on throughout the state of Florida as it relates to international and what other partner organizations are doing around the state. Lastly is the market statistics databases and country market information on our website. There's a whole section devoted just to the data and information as it relates to exporting and importing to the state of Florida. So if you're looking for any kind of data in that regard, that's a wonderful resource to turn to. The benefits of exporting, I think sometimes we often get too wound up in talking about our grants that we forget why people want to export. So we like to show this, and of course those on the call that are exporting presently, they know many of the advantages, and those who perhaps would like to one day export, here's more or less reasons why someone would want to. So rather than the proverbial all your eggs in one basket, it helps to diversify your customer base. I think there's quite a number of companies that have found out the hard way, if your only customer might be Disney, probably not a great strategy right now. And you should diversify. Now that could be something as simple as diversifying with another company or companies in the US, or better yet, look to markets abroad. So it diversifies your customer base. And we have many success stories. I won't name any company specifically, but I'll mention a few of the success stories that our companies have received from doing this. Grow new markets, pretty much following on to what I just said, important to look to the future. We all get rather complacent and just sort of take it as it comes until these kinds of situations like the pandemic occur, and all of a sudden we say, gee, I wish I would have taken a little more time to be planning instead of being reactive. So another one, and mitigate risk, whether it's financial risk, whether it is any kind of risk, being able to spread your risk over a wider array of either customers or perhaps taking advantage of some programs that I'll talk more about through the US government and specifically Ex-Im Bank and the SBA, Small Business Administration. Expand products and service reach. Certainly, the more of your product that's out there, the more people are going to know about it, and the more people that hopefully would become your customers, which then follows on to the increased sales. We all know that the very best way to advertise your product is for someone else to talk about it and tell their friends or their colleagues or their peers. So this too expands that to the point where now other people in other countries are actually talking about your product instead of you. And then, of course, to create a competitive advantage, because many times companies continue to buy from the same supplier year after year after year without really checking the market to see what other options are out there. You may be able to offer your product at 75 or 50% less than the competition, simply because the person who's been buying all these years keeps going back to the same supplier. So being able to put your product out there and make it available in the marketplace on an international basis can be quite advantage, very much an advantage. So then we support all of these sectors for the purpose of international, in particular, life sciences, aviation, aerospace, and defense, which I'll talk more about, information technology, financial services, and professional services, clean tech, defense and homeland security, logistic and distribution. Again, that's not really something our organization, or that is Enterprise Florida's International Trade and Development, would be directly involved in. But as I said early on, if you're a manufacturer, I can't say you're guaranteed to receive one of our grants, but you definitely have a very high probability. And there's some reasons why you may or may not, and I'll talk about those too in just a moment. But if you support one of these others, and because I'm so used to talking about aviation and aerospace and defense, Sherry mentioned something in my intro called MROs. Frankly, I hate acronyms, but we all get used to them. MROs stand for maintenance, repair, and overhaul. That is a rather unique industry sector within aviation, aerospace, and defense. So these are the companies that, and in fact, there's perhaps more of them in Florida than anywhere else in the United States. Majority of them are in South Florida, although certainly not all. They're scattered throughout the state. But these are companies that either support the commercial industry, they support defense industry. They can take in, for example, a nose gear on a 737 that is now, it's time for it to be refurbished, and they send it back out as if it's a brand new nose gear, which is then put back on a plane. So these maintenance, repair, and overhaul companies offer a really wide array of services, more than I would have ever expected before getting into this particular line of business. So maintenance, repair, and overhaul is a subset of aviation. They don't necessarily manufacture, but because they support one of our major sectors, they too, in most cases, qualify for our grants and services. Life sciences is certainly another one, and of course the others have already been mentioned. So two really important criteria for companies to be part of the customer base that we work with, and that they're export ready. And by that, I mean you've had export experience. Now, you could become an exporter, as I like to call it, by default. For example, you have a website. Someone in some part of the world gets on your website and says, gee, I really like what you're selling. Send me 10 of them. Now you have to go through that process of exporting. And that can have a number of steps. If it's a fairly simple process, there's not as many steps as sometimes when it becomes, of course, far more complicated in the kind of thing that's being exported. But in that situation, it's more reactionary. It's not a strategy. So that person or company that is exporting by default is a great candidate for our programs and grants, because in most cases, they really haven't thought about exporting as a strategy. They've been more, send me the orders and I'll ship you what you want. So export experience is very important. Adequate capital for the long haul. On average, and you'll hear me say this again when I get to the export marketing plan, which is another one of our grants, it takes about 18 months from when you begin the process of exporting, that is to say, you're export ready and now you want to get out there and start selling your product, until you might receive your first order. I'll just add at this point that in almost every other part of the world, exporting and the function of exporting really comes down to almost a personal relationship. In almost every other part of the world, people want to know you before they buy from you. I'm not saying that isn't true in the US, but because we're a rather litigious society, we defer to the contract. If you don't do what I like, I'll sue you. Instead, although contracts are certainly done all the time with companies in other countries, it really comes down to a relationship. So that's why if you've been in sales for any length of time, you know these things don't happen quickly. They sometimes can take months, even years, before you start to see the results. And then 100% management support. You'll hear me say that again later on, but this is not a top-down approach. It's not a bottom-up approach, it's a top-down approach, meaning that the management has to be solidly behind this and supportive, because the process of exporting, and you'll probably hear me say this again later on, is not for the faint of heart. It is hugely rewarding. It can be very advantageous for your company, but there's a learning curve. And depending on what you're exporting, that learning curve can be rather shallow or very steep or straight up. It really depends on the product that you're selling and the complexity by which it is exported. For those kinds of questions, I will defer to some of our partners in the area of the U.S. Commercial Service. I'll talk more about them in a moment, but that's really where you can get into the kinds of things that are necessary, the paperwork and so forth, if a company wants to export and they've not done it. Generally speaking, to be eligible for our grants, and there's some other criteria, but in business for at least 2 years. There's only one exception to that, and that exception is if the principals of the company have had years of experience in that specific industry. We'll take a look at it and consider it, but it's not a given. Whereas the rest of the companies that we work with, if they're a startup, then there's really no point in them coming to us until they've had at least 2 years in business. Less than 500 employees, and I need to add to this worldwide. So it's more the issue of how the company, whether it's a small local operation, clearly if it's a mom and pop, or if it's a small business, then that would not be a problem. But some of the companies that we work with have a Florida division of a much larger, either US corporation or an international company. So again, adding to that, less than 500 employees worldwide. And a Florida registered corporation on sunbiz.org. Most of you are probably familiar with sunbiz.org. It's where you go to see what companies are registered, either as an LLC, corporation. There's a variety of corporate structures, but the company must be found in some form or fashion. It can even be a doing business as, just as long as it's a proven Florida corporation in some capacity. The Gold Key and Matchmaking Service, this is the way we used to do it up until, what, mid-March. So in the past, this was more the standard than the norm, whereby the Gold Key service is something through the U.S. Commercial Service, and the U.S. Commercial Service is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. So typically a company, if they would want to set up appointments in a chosen location, pick a country, pretty much anywhere in the world, and they were to contact me, I would engage our local U.S. Commercial Service representative, of which we have 2 in Orlando, and they in turn would begin a conversation to find out, 1, what country or markets they're interested in, 2, what products and services they have to sell. They would fill out a brief questionnaire, and following that, then that U.S. Commercial Service representative would speak with their colleague in the embassy or the consul of the country that this company wants to export to. If after that conversation occurs, it's agreed that the U.S. Commercial Service employees in that embassy can arrange the appointments that have been requested by the company, then the U.S. Commercial Service will go forward with setting up those meetings. Generally, they're 3 to 5 meetings, and they're guaranteed. They also usually happen on the same day. So someone now is ready to go to pick a country, Germany, and before they arrive, these 3 to 5 pre-qualified meetings are set up and ready to go, and they're based on the client's criteria. So it would be the best distributor, the ideal partner, or the best kind of customer, or it could be a mix of those. So they now arrive in said country. The meetings are set up generally at a hotel. Sometimes they go to the facility itself. They have those meetings, and then following that, the business hopefully will move forward. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. That's really a matter of whether, probably during the meetings, they can agree on whether there's a benefit to both parties. So that's the Gold Key. That's how we used to do it. That's how we will eventually do it again. But in the interim, I'll be talking in just a moment about our virtual business matchmaking. So the way this works, as with almost all of our grants, is it's reimbursable, meaning you front end the money, and then after the event occurs, you turn in an export sales report, which is a very simple form, and an invoice for the amount that you've been awarded. In the case of the Gold Keys, you then generally it costs about $950 to $1,200, and again, that's a reimbursable grant. We have 14 offices around the world, and for that reason, it is. We'll talk more about this in a moment, but these are all the offices that we contract with in order to provide trade and economic development services. So as you can see, it's quite an array of offices that are representing the state of Florida. They are all contract, they are not employees. And in fact, in Asia, the office that has previously been in Hong Kong, there's a better chance than not it's being relocated to Singapore. But again, it gives you a feel for where we have offices in terms of helping companies to look at markets for exporting. The virtual business matchmaking is, as I said just a moment ago, the result of what transpired just a few short months ago, and that is the pandemic. So in order to allow business to continue, we began a service with virtual business matchmaking. We have the offices in Europe, and more recently, Canada and Mexico came online. And then over the coming months, probably most of those other offices that you saw on that map will also offer the same service. So it's much like the Gold Key that I described to you. The difference is that in addition to that initial discussion back and forth, so a company calls me, and I've had many calls, companies wanting to know more about it. I put them in contact with my colleague, Andrea Moore, who is the project manager for this, primarily at this point, although some of us will be helping out as we go forward with other offices. She will then send a questionnaire, understand what the company wants to accomplish. She will have a conversation with the office where the meetings are requested. The office will determine if they can set those meetings up. Then there will be a conversation, virtual conversation meeting between the office and the client. If everyone agrees that these meetings are a good fit for both sides, then the Foreign Office will take about 4 to 6 weeks in order to set those meetings up. And of course, they will happen virtually. So that's how the program works. Now, the cost for that is $2,500. In this particular case, just like with our other grants, as I mentioned, it's reimbursable. So the company would pay the Foreign Office. Following these meetings, the company would complete an export sales report and then send us an invoice for the amount that they've been awarded. So that's how the virtual business matchmaking works. And I'll just flip back to this office, to this screen, so that you can see all the that at some point will probably be coming online. But for now, it covers almost all of Europe and the EU, as well as I mentioned, Canada and Mexico. What the deliverables are: it's designed to connect the Florida buyers and sellers. Pretty simple. Once again, targets the small to medium-sized companies. Since we launched this program about a month and a half, 2 months ago, the amount of activity is pretty overwhelming. My colleague Andrea has somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 companies that are basically in the queue. Not all of them are going forward immediately with meetings, but there are a number of them that are ongoing. We're also allowing companies to have 2 of these running simultaneous, meaning that if you, for example, wanted to have meetings in Germany as well as meetings in the UK, those meetings could occur simultaneously insofar as not only the discussions, but as well the process of setting those meetings up. And then the video conferencing will occur. And then after that, now I want to be fair and say the U.S. Commercial Service has its own virtual version of this. And for some companies, that may be the best option. Other companies may choose to use our service. We don't care which one you use. It's really up to the client and what works best. In this particular case, the companies, as I said, are really responsible for doing the follow-up, but with our offices, they will provide a little more aftercare and assistance going forward. Whereas with the U.S. Commercial Service, when those meetings occur, clients are generally on their own after that. Certainly, I'm sure they would be willing to make some phone calls, but it's not part of their service, whereas part of ours includes aftercare that provides a lot of follow-up. The Targeted Sector Trade Show Grant. This is probably our most popular. So again, I'm speaking past tense. We, in fact, as of today, I should be at the Farnborough Air Show outside of London. It occurs every other year, and it's always in London. The next year will be Paris, and it goes back and forth, and then there's other air shows. The Farnborough Air Show was canceled back in April to the great disappointment of many, many people, including myself, but it could not be avoided. So when we get back to the point of in-person shows, and in fact, I just received an email before getting on this that a company is interested in attending a trade show, an in-person trade show next April in Mexico. So we can only hope that that will happen. But this particular grant provides 75% up to $7,500 toward the cost of the booth only. I'm going to repeat that, toward the cost of the booth only. It does not cover any of the transportation costs, the lodging costs, per diem costs, none of that. It does not cover any shipping costs for getting your product or whatever it is you may want to display over. It is only for the booth itself. In my case, where I organize and manage a Florida pavilion at 4 major air shows, as mentioned early on, then I buy raw space. I have a stand builder that builds it to spec, and then I have different size booths, and I sell those booths for the most part at cost to the exhibitors. They pay a deposit. Once they pay a deposit, I send them an application for the trade show grant. They then hopefully will be approved, but I can't guarantee it until they actually submit and receive the final word. They then will pay the balance. They will actually go to the show. Following the show, they will submit the export sales report, any additional invoices that they may have incurred since the application, and if they're eligible expenses, they will be added in, and the company will receive 75% of that, but no more than $7,500. After the show, the export sales report plus the invoice for the amount that they were awarded, and they'll receive a check in approximately 2 weeks, plus or minus. So they're highly effective. They can also be very expensive to attend, but very worthwhile. Even though they can be very expensive, till you add in transportation of employees and hotels and all of that, in many cases, if you pick up just one good customer, it more than pays for itself. But it's like everything else. It takes a lot of work. Replacing the in-person show is the virtual trade show. We've had at least one so far. We partnered with the AmCham, which is the American Chamber of Commerce in Columbia, and 21 Florida companies participated in this virtual trade show. And it was, to be honest, pretty darn amazing. I had not had any experience in such a thing, and most of us have not. But those 21 companies, in many cases, saw some business coming from it. Just like with anything else, it's very rare they're going to sell anything, whether it's virtual or in person, at the show. It's the follow-up that really counts, and usually the 24 months going forward when the actual business will occur. So we're offering the virtual trade show grant. 3 of the trade shows that I would otherwise either participate in or support have now gone virtual. So there is Aero Engines that was to have taken place in Norway. That is now going to be virtual in September. There was the MRO Asia Pacific that was going to be in Singapore end of September. It is now virtual. And then there was the MRO Europe in Barcelona that was going to be at the end of October, and it too is virtual. We offer $2,500, up to $2,500 toward the cost of a virtual show. The matchmaking I've already spoken about. This next one is really interesting, and it's something that a lot of companies, I believe, should be taking advantage of, but are not. It's the global website localization. We partner with a company in the UK, and that company, if the client, in this case my client or any of my colleagues' clients, are eligible, will receive 2 websites in 2 native languages of 2 new markets that that company wants to penetrate. So pick 2 countries. They can even be English-speaking countries. They could be the UK and they could be Australia. They could be Australia and South Africa. They could be any 2 countries, pretty much the most exotic kinds of languages that you can imagine in some cases. So let me give you a real life example. I have an aviation company that I've been working with that received this grant. And this company, IBT, built 2 websites, one in Arabic and the other in Korean, because that's where their markets are outside the US, or at least their primary markets. Now, a lot of the aviation companies that I speak with say, it really doesn't matter to me because English is the primary language in aviation. And that is absolutely true. Where the problem occurs is on the technical side. And I'll give you an anecdotal story that helps explain that. Aviation company had two websites. One of them was in Chinese. An individual from that company went to China and was a speaker at a conference. During that talk, the audience, all Chinese, were not paying attention to the speaker. They were on their smart devices. The speaker is a bit miffed because he doesn't think anyone is listening to him. When he finished, they all came up to him and wanted to ask questions about his company and his products because they had been looking at his website in Mandarin. That's the power of having a website in the native language of the country where you want to market. On top of that, and probably the most important part, is that IBT also makes sure that it's SEO compliant. For example, the way people search for things, forget the language. Even if you're talking about somebody in Canada searching for something that in the US we may search for, they may use different words, they may use different order of words. Anybody that knows about SEO, search engine optimization, you know it's all about making sure those keywords are showing up everywhere. So that is vitally important. The cost of that grant is $12,000. Enterprise Florida covers $8,000. So a company receives two websites in two native languages for $2,000 each. And if anybody has worked in creating websites, you know that's a really good deal. Now, I will also add, generally speaking, it piggybacks on your existing site. If your existing site is such that it's the kind that you already are getting a lot of traffic on, then up in the right-hand corner, you'll see the flag of the country and the language that you now offer, and all they have to do is click on that, as many of us have, and then you can see it in that language. There is an after market provision. If you so choose, you can leave it with IBT, and the cost is $1,000 a year to maintain it and update it, or you can take everything and go somewhere else if you choose. Export marketing plan. I've already alluded to this a bit in some of my previous conversations or my previous comments. This is probably my favorite grant because if a company has been exporting but with no real strategy, or even if a company has been exporting for quite a while but has never really thought much about doing anything strategically and instead has just been reactionary, this is an amazing document. The cost is $5,000. Enterprise Florida covers $4,500, and the company pays $500. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to sound like the guy on TV, but wait, there's more. The more is that at least for a period of time, our SBDC that will prepare the plan is waiving the $500. That won't last forever, certainly, but at least for now. So this export marketing plan is an incredibly valuable document. It's highly proprietary. I can't even show you one if you ask to see it because it's that sensitive in terms of the information in it. The information is driven by data and research. And if you were to go to the open market and pay a consultant to do what you would receive in an export marketing plan, you would pay easily $30,000. And I say that because I described this to someone once and they said, man, I wish I'd known because I just paid somebody $30,000. So I'm not exaggerating when I say how powerful this document is. I'll give you another example. There's a company, they're an MACF member. I've been working with them for a while. They actually started out with an export marketing plan. So instead of jumping to any of our other grants, and there's nothing wrong with that, it's just in some cases we recommend that the company starts with an export marketing plan. And that company thought that Australia was a major export market. When the plan was presented, Australia was number 3, I believe, 3 or 4. Korea was number 1, and I honestly can't remember what was number 2. But the point of that is it really told them where they needed to be putting their resources. Now, when that marketing plan is delivered, we do this in partnership with the Small Business Development Center, Enterprise Florida is at the table, and the U.S. Commercial Service. So we don't just throw it at you and say good luck. We go through it in depth, usually takes about 2 hours. People are a bit overwhelmed because they're not expecting to have a document this powerful presented. And we tell them, think about it, and we'll get back to you in 2 weeks. And then the real work begins. And at that point, they can make decisions, much more informed decisions, as to where they should be putting their resources, where perhaps they should be going to trade shows, where they should have 2 online native language speaking websites. Anyway, you get the picture. It's really a powerful tool. International Registration Grant is fairly new. I say new in that it's still been around now, probably a good 18 months, almost 2 years probably. So if a company is required to have a registration or certification to do business in that country, Enterprise Florida will cover 50% up to $10,000. I'll give you an example. The company that I just alluded to that received an export marketing plan learned that they needed to have a CE mark in Europe to do business. The CE mark is similar to our UL approval. They then applied, actually used a consultant who ensured that they were CE compliant and met all of the requirements that the EU required to sell into the EU. The cost of that was around $8,000 or $9,000, and they received half of that as a reimbursement. I find this a lot with aviation companies and with medical device companies. I even spoke to a company the other day, and I was shocked to hear that actually they, in some cases, do require a registration or certification, and therefore they very well may take advantage of this grant. Eligibility, I've already gone through some of that previously, and I know this is a lot of information, so I'm not going to dwell on it. You'll see it and you can go over it, and then if you have questions, you can always get back to me. In the past, Enterprise Florida offered companies 3 grants in our fiscal year, which is July 1 to June 30. We just started our new fiscal year. As a result of the pandemic, even back in May, we said companies can receive 4 grants from that point to the end of the next fiscal year, now the present fiscal year, which will end on June 30th of 2021. You can mix and match. As you can see, these are all the options that you have. I have had to caution some of my clients because they have gotten so turned on to this that I was afraid they may use up all 4 of their grants within a couple of months. So I've told them, you're welcome to use the grants however you wish. I just don't want you using all 4 and then coming back to me later and saying, well, I'm ready to use another grant, only to find out you don't have that available to you. These, again, are based on the eligibility and whether companies will even qualify, but you get the idea. Certification or certificate of free sale, I have honestly never even dealt with one of these. My colleagues in South Florida and other parts of the state have. If a company is exporting a food product, this is required. So keep that in mind. If you're in that market, this is something you probably need, or perhaps you've already requested it. So here's the summary. Enterprise Florida has a range of programs and grants to assist companies to export. You can go to our website and under trade grants, see everything that I've just described to you in more detail. Grants are reimbursable, meaning you upfront the money and then receive a reimbursement after the activity, the show, the meetings, whatever might occur. And you have local trade specialists and partner assistants throughout the state. So we're very fortunate here in Central Florida to have the SBDC office, the Small Business Development Center office. They are an amazing resource. If you haven't used them, you should. They have so much information available. If you're a startup, if you've been around for 20 years, they can still help you in many ways. They also are the entity that produces the export sales, the export marketing plan that I mentioned a few moments ago. The U.S. Commercial Service. The U.S. Commercial Service is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, as I said earlier, And their job is on a national level what ours is on a state level. They offer a phenomenal range of services to companies. They too have certain criteria that have to be met. And theirs, again, is less parochial in that if a company is in a different state and maybe only has a very small branch office in Florida, they can work with them in another state. We cannot unless the office in Florida is a separate entity from the out-of-state corporation and has its own P&L, and all the benefits that come back from the grant go to that location. As I said, U.S. Commercial Service is not quite as strict on that as we are. They do, and they must have 51% contact from the U.S. Like, it's a little strange at times in some product areas, but by and large, for them to offer their services, it has to contain 51% U.S. made. And then there's the Central Florida International Trade Office, headed up by a fellow by the name of Chris Leggett. Another great resource. So those are all resources above and beyond what Enterprise Florida offers. And we have these regions around the state. As Sherry said in the beginning, I am responsible for 10 counties in Central Florida. If for some reason you're tuning in from one of these other regions and you do not know who is representing your region, please let me know and I'll personally introduce you via email. We have an amazing team. We all work so well together. It's sometimes scary, which is perhaps a good thing, but we really do work well together. And we all have our strengths, certainly in different areas. So I hate to break it to you, but I am your local contact. So take that for what it's worth. Anytime you have any questions about whatever I've spoken of, if you're not sure if your company may qualify, if you're eager to contact the SBDC or the U.S. Commercial Service or the Central Florida International Trade Office, please contact me and I'll make those introductions for you. There's my contact information along with my colleagues. They're, of course, well acquainted on social media. And there's my contact information again. I will now turn it back over to Christian and Sherry for the Q&A portion.
Thank you, Michael. That was a great webinar. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We do have some questions that have come in. First question, my company has never exported. What should I do to begin the process of exporting?
Yeah, that's a great question. What we recommend, if you've never exported, you need to start with the basics. One is that I would immediately have you contact the SBDC locally. They can give you the steps that are necessary to get into exporting. I would also recommend you contact Chris Leggett with the Central Florida International Trade Office. He too can help you understand the steps. And then there's the U.S. Commercial Service. And although you may not be quite ready, well, in fact, I can tell you're not ready if you're not export ready, but they still can offer some services. We're always happy to help. But as I said, to be eligible for our grants and services, you have to be export ready, which generally means you've had some exporting experience. There's also a huge amount of information on the net, and I highly recommend export.gov, I think it is. I should know it, export.gov or trade.gov. That'll give you everything you ever wanted to know about exporting and kind of that ABC approach.
I see another question, Michael. What can the U.S. Commercial Service do to help my company export?
So the U.S. Commercial Service is a part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. One of the best features that I think they offer, aside from just great information and assistance and contacts, if a company is trying to enter another market but cannot get into that market because it appears, or perhaps it's overt, that they're being shut out of that market, then the U.S. Commercial Service has an advocacy group in the embassy of the country. Again, almost any country in the world. So let me give you a quick example. A company in Washington State, and I was told this, so I'm simply repeating what I was told. A company in Washington State wanted to sell plywood into South Korea. South Korea said, we will not accept any plywood unless it's 5-ply. The company in Washington State reached out to the U.S. Commercial Service. U.S. Commercial Service then was contacted in the embassy in Seoul. There was a trade agreement in place, so that kind of helped along. But nevertheless, the Washington State company was able to prove that their 3- and 4-ply was just as strong as 5-ply. So the 5-ply was either just an old number that was used or an arbitrary number that was used. Bottom line is, if it had not been for the U.S. Commercial Service going to bat for that Washington State company, they would not have received a very large order for their plywood. So that's just one of the advantages. If the company that is also going after a government contract in another country lets the U.S. Commercial Service know, they too will go to bat and will, in some cases, perhaps most cases, a letter will go from the ambassador in that location to whomever is the person making decisions on what companies to choose, strongly suggesting that they choose the U.S. company. So those are the kinds of things that many people do not know are offered by the U.S. Commercial Service.
Great, Mike. Very thorough. So thank you very much. Was there any other questions?
What if my company is a division of an out-of-state or international company? Can I still receive grants? I have a question here.
Yes.
What if my company is a division of an out-of-state or international company? Can it still receive grants?
Possibly. That's why it's important to speak with me first or one of my colleagues to determine, at least initially. So I said early on that one of the grant requirements is 500 employees or less worldwide. So that's one. Two, if the Florida entity has its own profit and loss statement, receives no funding, subsidy, whatever you want to call it, from the company, corporate or otherwise, outside of the state of Florida, and they meet all of our other criteria, then in most cases they can. There's a company in Kissimmee that is an aviation support company. They are owned by a company out of Connecticut. Just because they're owned by a company out of Connecticut does not ban them from getting a grant. In fact, they've gone to 2 trade shows with me, and they utilized our grants. They went to the Dubai trade show with me last November, and they were in Singapore with me this past February. So the answer is we just have to know more about the relationship with that out-of-state or international company to determine if they might be eligible.
Thank you. And we have one more question that came in. Why does it appear that the Department of Agriculture makes it easier to do business, export business through them versus the Department of Commerce? I guess this company has had more success going through the Department of Agriculture and has gotten more support than they have through the Department of Commerce.
Understood. And Florida has a very robust program. I must admit, I haven't really had much contact with it. If there is an agricultural specific company, generally we send them to the Florida Agriculture Division because they have some similar kinds of programs that we do. I would say commercial service can be highly advantageous depending on probably who you speak with. So if you're having issues with that, again, reach out to me via email, give me a phone call, tell me a little bit more, and I'll see if I can help make some further introductions with the U.S. Commercial Service.
Well, we'd like to thank Michael, for your time today and your many years of experience in the economic development and in manufacturing. You've worked closely with both Christian and myself, and Enterprise Florida is a great partner to MACF in supporting not only the Central Florida manufacturers, but obviously the statewide manufacturers. We'd also like to thank Florida Makes for their continued support of Florida manufacturers. And we'd like to thank everyone on this webinar today for your participation. If you would like more information about MACF, please check out our website at www.macf.biz. For future events, please visit our website. And as you exit the webinar, we are seeking your feedback about how to improve these webinars and better meet your needs with topics of value to you. Please watch for upcoming webinars through MACF and Florida Makes. And again, I bid you a good day, stay well, and keep manufacturing. Thank you so much.